Have you ever lain next to the woman you love? The one who's still with you? Still kind and felt like you were trapped in a body no one wanted anymore? I'm a legal escort in Australia. For over 10 years, I've sat with men who weren't looking for release. They were searching for something that had gone quiet at home, to be wanted. Some of them deeply loved their partners, but they were also slowly dying beside a woman who no longer touched them because of trauma, exhaustion, or simply because no one ever taught them that without intimacy, love begins to fade too. If this story already feels close to home, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and leave the word love in the comments. I want to know who's truly still here with me. There was a man in his early 60s who came to see me once. Silver hair, navy suit, perfect posture. He walked into the room with the kind of quiet confidence that made me think he probably ran his own company, or at least a division of something important. But the moment he sat down, something shifted. His hands fidgeted. His gaze fell to the floor. When I smiled, he nodded politely but didn't speak. Later, he told me he hadn't flirted in years. He said, "I just don't know how to begin anymore." And I believed him. This is what happens to men who go too long without being wanted. They forget how to show up as themselves. They become caretakers, providers, good men with good intentions, but they vanish from their own lives. I don't think he stopped being attractive. I think he stopped believing that anyone would want what he still had to give. And that belief, more than age or time or wrinkles, is what slowly kills a man's presence. Not because he's broken, but because somewhere along the way, he started believing that needing intimacy made him weak. It doesn't. What makes a man disappear is not wanting too much. It's pretending he doesn't want anything at all. He started the conversation by telling me her story before even mentioning his own. "She's been through a lot," he said. "There was abuse, emotional trauma. I just want to be the one who treats her right." I've heard this many times. Good men believing that if they love hard enough, they can undo someone else's past. He told me she wasn't ready for intimacy, but he understood. I asked him what that meant for him. He didn't answer. This is where many men begin to vanish when they think being patient and kind means silencing their own needs. They think love should heal, and maybe it does, but not when it turns into self-erasure. Some women are not looking to reconnect with desire. They've chosen a life without it, or their bodies have closed that door for reasons they no longer want to explain. That doesn't make them unworthy. It just makes them unavailable. And you? You're not her therapist. You're not the one assigned to carry her healing on your back. You're a man, with needs that are valid, with a body that still wants to be wanted. And when you start calling your silence support, when you confuse your deprivation with love, you're not being strong. You're being erased slowly, politely, and completely. He told me he believed it could get better. She just needs to feel safer. He said, "I think if I'm gentle enough, patient enough, she'll want me again." He was sincere, hopeful, and already disappearing. What he didn't realize was that her libido had vanished not because of him, but because of years on birth control, medication that dulled her sensations, stress she never spoke of, and hormones that hadn't felt balanced in years. Men often believe that desire is a result of their behavior, that if they behave just right, their partner will light up again. But that's not how it works. You can't coax a fire from someone who has no fuel left to burn. Desire isn't a prize you win for being good. It's a living, breathing energy that either flows or it doesn't. And women who've gone numb, physically or emotionally, don't always know how to say it out loud. So they don't. They just grow quieter, less available, less present. And men, not wanting to pressure them, pull back further. They get softer, more careful, until eventually both people are dancing around a space where touch used to live. But this isn't love. This is mourning in slow motion. And no one tells you how to grieve a body that still sleeps beside you every night but never reaches back. He said it gently, almost as if apologizing. "She's not rejecting me," he told me. "She's just never in the mood." There were always reasons: fatigue, stress, headaches, timing. But what lingered behind all of that was a silence he didn't know how to read. He told himself she wasn't refusing him, so he stayed hopeful. He stopped asking, stopped initiating. He waited for her to show something, anything. But she never did. What he didn't understand was that some people don't decline affection outright. They just quietly withdraw. They don't say no. They disappear into the fog of avoidance, hoping the issue will vanish if they stay still long enough. But when one person consistently avoids intimacy and the other keeps absorbing that avoidance without naming it, something breaks. It doesn't shatter loudly. It fades, slowly. And by the time he realizes he hasn't been touched with any real warmth in months, maybe years, he starts to believe he's asking for too much. But he isn't. He's just been living in a space where desire once existed and now barely flickers. And a man who no longer believes he's allowed to want will eventually stop believing he's allowed to speak. That's not kindness. That's decay. He had done everything right. He was respectful, considerate, always careful not to overstep. He brought flowers on ordinary days. He remembered anniversaries she didn't. He never pushed, never presumed. And yet, she left him. Not for someone richer, not for someone better, just someone bolder. He was stunned. I treated her so well, he said, and he had. But here's what he didn't realize. While he was being gentle, she was wondering if he even wanted her. Many nice men confuse politeness with attraction. They believe their restraint communicates care, but often it communicates distance. Desire doesn't rise in carefulness. It rises in presence. When a man holds back everything to avoid being misread, he's rarely read at all. And women, especially confident, emotionally alive women, don't guess. They feel. And if what they feel is hesitancy, they often translate it as disinterest. It's not that she needs you to be aggressive, but she needs to know you're alive, that you're present, that something stirs in you when you're near her. When you try so hard not to offend, you end up being forgettable. And that's not respectful. That's invisible. No woman falls for a ghost, no matter how kind he is. She falls for the man who isn't afraid to show up fully, even if he risks being seen. He looked exhausted when he said it. I just need a sign from her first. A touch, a look, anything that tells me she still wants me. He had stopped making the first move years ago. Rejection will do that to a man. Slowly, it convinces him that wanting is dangerous, that desiring someone who no longer responds will only leave him feeling small. So he waits for a signal, an invitation, a green light. But she never gives it. Not because she's cruel, but because most women don't want to lead in that way. They want to feel something coming toward them, not something hiding behind them. And when you pull back to protect yourself, you're also pulling away from the very thing that could reignite what's gone dim. Women don't need perfection. They need clarity, presence, the feeling that you're still in this with them, body and soul. But when you hesitate long enough, even the ones who are open begin to close. Not because they've stopped caring, but because you've stopped showing up. A man who hands over all emotional responsibility to the woman who asks her to read his mind, reassure him, initiate for him. Maybe trying to be safe, but he's also making her feel alone. And when both of you are waiting for the other to go first, intimacy dies, standing still. He asked me the question with genuine uncertainty. Is it wrong to leave someone just because the sex is gone? And I didn't rush to answer. Because that question isn't really about sex. It's about what a man convinces himself to live without. Many men stay in sexless relationships not because they're fulfilled, but because they believe leaving makes them selfish. They call it love. They call it patience. But beneath all the noble labels, something else is happening. He's feeding guilt. He's feeding the belief that good men don't walk away, even when they're starving. He's feeding a silence that gets heavier every year. And the worst part? He's doing it alone. Because while he convinces himself that staying is honorable, she may not even know he's suffering. Or worse, she knows, but says nothing. When love stops being mutual, when affection is no longer exchanged and intimacy becomes a memory, what exactly are you staying for? Habit? Duty? The fear of hurting someone else? And in doing so, are you slowly disappearing from yourself? Men don't always leave when they stop being loved. They leave when they stop recognizing themselves in the mirror. And that's not betrayal, that's survival. By the time you reach 50, the world no longer applauds your restraint. People assume you've figured it all out. They see the calm, the routine, the quiet competence, and they don't ask what you've given up to keep the peace. But I will, because behind every man who smiles politely through a dinner party sits a story of something he no longer receives. And it's not always dramatic. Sometimes it's just this. No one reaches for him anymore. No one touches him with hunger, with wonder, with warmth. He's become the background of his own life, steady, dependable, unseen. I've sat across from men like that. Some married for decades, some recently divorced, all of them asking the same silent question. Is this it? Is this all I'm allowed to want now? The answer is no. You're allowed to want more. You're allowed to crave connection, to feel desired, to have a body that still wakes up with longing and doesn't need to apologize for it. You're allowed to leave the conversations that no longer nourish you and step toward the ones that do. You're allowed to say, I need more than loyalty. I need to be felt. You don't need anger. You don't need ultimatums. You just need to return to your own truth and lead from there. Some women will meet you, others won't. That's not your fault. But if you keep shrinking, if you keep calling your silence maturity and your loneliness strength, you will lose something that takes years to recover. The part of you that still believes he matters. So say what you need. Ask what you want. And if her answer is no, at least now, you'll have the clarity to decide whether that's something you can live with. Because the greatest gift of getting older isn't acceptance. It's discernment. And the man who dares to want again is not naive. He's finally free. If this story made you pause, even for a moment, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and leave the word love in the comments. Maybe the truth you've been carrying alone is the very thing someone else has been waiting to hear.